Now, it's time for Straight on the Point with your host from some undisclosed location. Here's Jesse T.
Well, it's good to be back with you. The Brown Beauty is back on duty, baby. That's right. It's time for the Jesse T Show right here on there and everywhere. Of course, from the community, boom, to the world. We're with you here live every single day of the week, Monday through Friday from 5 to 6. It's the Jesse T Show, bringing you the fun, wild, informative, and entertainment side of life. The world, according to Torrero, you're going to be straight on the point. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about OJ because, you know, he's back in the news, of course, in Las Vegas. He just can't help himself getting in trouble. When he was going to get out of prison and paroled out, what was going to take place was that he wanted to go over to Florida, but the governor of the state of Florida kind of said, we don't really want you. I mean, we can't stop you from being here. We can't stop you from coming here. It's a free country and all, but we really don't want you there. But, you know, they made it kind of uncomfortable for him to be able to come to Florida. And in doing that, let me turn this down here just a little bit. In doing that, he decided to stay in Las Vegas, which I think was probably a good idea, stay in Nevada, because my idea of things here is I sure like him to get thrown back in jail as fast as we can. And to discuss that a little bit further, a little bit later on in about 10 or 15 minutes or so, we're going to have the author, Cheryl Kane, and Detective Pembroke, who are going to be checking in here. They wrote the most recent book, and it is a play-by-play discussion. It is like minute by minute. Detective Pembroke, former LAPD detective, one of the very best, who retired, he took this whole trial and this murder, and he went and researched it for 5 solid years. That's all he did. Became like a fanatic of this, and he covered everything. He turned over stuff that LAPD, which screwed things up, couldn't do. So it's called a minute-by-minute account of the killing of Nicole Brown Simpson. Let me give you the exact name of it. It's called O.J. Simpson, the Killer, a minute-by-minute account of the homicides of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And you can get it on Amazon and Kindle. You can get it anywhere in all the bookstores and everything. It's a terrific read, and it's a minute-by-minute discussion. So we're going to have the Detective James M. Pembroke, who's the author, along with Cheryl Kane, who's the writer-author, here in just a few minutes to talk about OJ, one of our favorite topics here, because I do think that guy needs to get put back in jail. And I'm happy he's staying in Nevada, Las Vegas, because I think he's going to find that in a few years or less, we're going to see him back in jail for some silly, stupid thing. He's going to violate his parole. In fact, he already did, so we'll be talking about that. Good to have you here with us on www.thepowerofvoices.com, as well as www.aventertainmentlive.com. And got to say hi to our folks on Facebook, our Facebook Live folks. Thanks a lot. We have us on. We're having a little bit of trouble connecting them on a regular basis on this end, but we do have you on at the studio, at the Power Voices studio in Los Angeles. So we got you coming a couple of ways. We always have a backup to a backup to a backup, because you never know when you need to have that system kind of kick in. Especially in today's technology, where we broadcast remotely, you never know how strong the signal is going to be. Saying hi to our friends on Instagram Live who have us on over here. Saying hi to Granda Grubfest. Granda Grubfest. Granda Grubfest, right? Something like this. I don't know. I just don't. Sometimes these names on Instagram and stuff, sometimes they really mess me up. You know, I just sometimes don't. I don't get them. That's the problem. I can't figure them out on the fly, and just crazy. Saying hi to Bo Reynolds, who has us on, JT Atkins, who has us on as well. So we've got a good show lined up for you today as we get things going on Periscope as well. And we're on YouTube. Always YouTube is our catch-all. You can always catch us on YouTube as we broadcast podcasts live there on YouTube simultaneously. And then everything is, of course, archived up on the podcast on YouTube and on Facebook.com/Jesse Torrero. So just before we make those phone calls out to our guests who are going to be on the show here, James M. Pembroke, author of A Minute-by-Minute Account of the Homicides of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, and, of course, his partner, Cheryl Kane. We had her down in the studio a couple of months ago, and it's good to have them back on there. Before we reach out to them, though, I wanted to cover a couple of things that, yes, are happening again. Oh, yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing sometimes what's going on in this world as we continue on with the further episodes of the liquidation and destruction of Hollywood. Yes, even more people to this day are in trouble with this sexual harassment. It is unbelievable what has been going on and how this thing is spreading. Who would have ever thought that it would spread out like it has? It is just, it's amazing when you think about, what just a few months ago and how this whole investigation is just exploding in every direction. It is amazing how deep this is going and how wide it's going. In fact, it's crossing over into politics and crossing over into other areas as well. I have a story here that I'm going to bring up real quick just to let you know. Another person has been named. James Woods, the great actor James Woods, has been named by Elizabeth Perkins, another terrific actress. She said he sexually harassed her years ago, and she's part of the Me Too site, Pound Me Too, and she says Woods has sexually harassed her. So that one is now in the books as well. Also, gotta say about this guy here, actress Bijou Phillips, a woman, has apologized to Mean Girls star Daniel Franzese. That's right, Daniel Franzese, who accused Phillips of body shaming and physical assaulting him on the set of the 2001 indie movie Bully. Actress Bijou Phillips has apologized to Mean Girls star Daniel Franzese, who accused Phillips of body shaming and physically assaulting him on the set of 2001 indie movie Bully. He's a big heavy set guy, and so he said she harassed him sexually and bullied him, and she came out as a woman and had to apologize to him. Oh boy! Another woman has come on board to claims that Steven Seagal sexually messed with her, assaulting her during an audition, claiming the actor fondled her breasts and grabbed her crotch. So Steven Seagal is basically, his career has been nowhere for a while and doesn't seem like it's going to be resurrected at all here in the very near future, because this stuff is starting to stick on people in a bad way. There's some more information that came out about this, and I just want to touch base on it just a little bit more because I find this stuff fascinating that finally Hollywood is starting to clean itself up. It is just amazing how deep and wide this stuff is. So let me just grab this story real quick here, and I had it lined up and ready to go, but of course, you know what happened. Of course, I lost the story. When I was messing around here just before the show on the website. Let me see. Update Hollywood harassment. Don't you just love the internet? We used to have to do these things in a completely different way before. It's amazing how we can do this now. All right, here's a new list. Andrew Kreisberg, big time dude, executive producer of Arrow and Supergirl and The Flash. Andrew Kreisberg, he's been accused by dozens of people, and Warner Brothers has suspended him. Benjamin Giannaccio, executive director of the Armory Show at the Art Fair, he's been replaced. He's been accused of sexually touching women, 5 women. David Goulad, chief executive of Primary Wave Entertainment Agency, man, assaulting 4 women. Jeff Hoover, Kentucky Speaker of the House, sexually harassed and inappropriate text messages. He's in trouble there. Kurt Webster, music publicist, sexual assault and harassment, including unwanted touching. He's in trouble there. Actor Andrew Dick, and he is a dick, always has been, sexually harassing, including groping. He was fired from his recent film. Michael Oreskes, head of news at NPR and former New York Times editor. Sexual harassment of 3 women have come forward. Hamilton Fish, president and publisher of the New Republic, complaints by female employees. Ken Baker, E! News correspondent, sexual harassment of 2 women, including unwanted kissing and inappropriate messages. Mark Halperin, that's a big one, NBC News and MSNBC contributor, author of Game of Change, sexual harassment of at least 5 women. Rick Nahara, director of CBS's Diversity Showcase, sexual harassment, including inappropriate comments to performers. Knight Landsman, publisher of Artform, sexual harassment of at least 9 women, including groping. Leon Weisler, a former editor of the New Republic, sexual harassment of several women, including inappropriate advances. Terry Richardson, fashion photographer, sexual harassment against him. John Besh, chief executive of Besh Restaurant Group, sexual harassment against him. Lockhart Steele, editor-director of Vox Media, sexual harassment of at least 1 person, including unwanted kissing. Robert Scoble, tech blogger and co-founder of Transformation Group, sexual assessment, harassment, and assault of 2 women. Chris Savino, creator of showrunner of The Lured House, sexual harassment, including unwanted sexual advances of as many as 12 women. I mean, and the list is growing and growing and growing and growing. Is this unbelievable, the clearinghouse that's taking place both in politics? Some heavy politicians were brought in on rape charges recently, Democrats, and it's just unbelievable what's happening here, and I'm all for it. Let's clean up the system. You talk about the cesspool in D.C. What about the cesspool over here? I can't wait till they get into the record business and get after some of these people in the great cesspool. Boy, that's going to make the TV and film business look like chump change. Of course, Clinton's in big trouble. Hillary Clinton, let's see her go down in a big way. She just might end up in jail. It's pretty amazing what's happening in that respect. It's just unbelievable how our world is going upside down. And so anyhow, the Jesse T Show, good to have you along. Just wanted to give you an update on that. I always like to cover that stuff. I just find it fascinating. And more power to the women and men that are coming forward right now. And in some cases are putting their careers on the line. Not so much anymore like it was 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And they are actually stepping forward and getting clear of all these issues here. And, you know, one of the things that is common among all of these charges being railed at people like Roy Moore, the judge. One of the things that all these men are men of power, the power of control. Amazing. All right, so we're going to switch back here, and we are going to bring on right now a terrific author, a couple of terrific authors, that is. We're going to bring on Cheryl Kane, who's going to be returning to our show in just a second. She authored a book along with her partner, a minute-by-minute expose on how O.J. was actually killed at the site. Now, we're not talking about things that were done off-site. We're talking about a minute-by-minute expose on how O.J. was murdered, along with her partner, James M. Pembroke, detective, LAPD, long career, distinguished, one of the very best detectives. He devoted 5 years, I believe, to this topic to try to find what really happened with O.J. Now, you know, as I've always said, I go on record, I think O.J. lopped the head off both these people. I thought he is a killer. I was working at a radio station, KTLH. I was in the middle of law school when all this was taking place. I'm not an attorney, but I did finish. But the bottom line is, and I was like the devil's advocate. And boy, I got a lot of heat and flack for that. But I always believed that he was the guy that did it. So, without further ado, I'd like to bring on Detective James Pembroke, a retired LAPD officer and author Cheryl Kane to the Jesse T Show. Good to have you guys back with me. How are you?
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for having us back.
Absolutely.
And everything we predicted about O.J. Simpson getting paroled is coming true because he can't stay out of trouble. And we've seen that in Las Vegas over the last week. He cannot stay out of trouble. He's a psychopath, and it's only a matter of time before he either harms or kills someone else.
It's pretty amazing. He wanted to originally go to Florida, the reports were saying, before he was paroled. But the governor of the state of Florida basically said, you can come here. We can't stop you from traveling if your parole officer and such will let you come here. It's not a problem, but we don't want you. And so, he stays in Vegas. And I think that's a good thing. I think he has the greatest chance of getting in trouble again in Vegas with the casinos and the liquor and the women and the partying and all that stuff. So it might be a little devil's advocate, that he gets released in Vegas. I think he's going to end up back in jail sooner than most people think.
He swore he had no problems. He swore before the parole board that he had no problems with alcohol or drug abuse. Now, we know he has a long history of cocaine abuse, and he proved himself, again, a liar, and he got in trouble in a Las Vegas casino. He's banned there by the security, the Cosmopolitan Hotel. And that's the tip of the iceberg. He hasn't even been out on parole for, a couple months, and he's already in trouble.
Yeah, he's already in trouble, and what I don't understand is how can he not get thrown back in jail? Isn't that a violation of his parole? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I do want to bring on Detective James M. Pembroke right now because Detective Pembroke was the gentleman that did all this massive research of your terrific book, and which is an expose, a timeline. So, Detective, are you there?
Yes.
Detective, good to have you on the show. We missed you the last time that Cheryl was in studio with us. So with OJ getting in trouble now again, we want to find out a little bit about your input and what you think about what's happening now. And then I would like to kind of focus in with you, Detective, on the murder scene and exactly what took place there, because I think a lot of people only have the fake media's interpretation of what happened.
Exactly. And the biggest problem is the majority of the people think that it was a double homicide, and it was not a double homicide. It was two separate homicides.
So the murder of Nicole and Ron, it wasn't at the same time? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. What happened was Nicole's mother, she lost her eyeglasses at the Mezzaluna restaurant. They found them outside. So Kathy from the Mezzaluna restaurant was able to, she found them outside in the gutter. She told Nicole's mother she found the eyeglasses. Nicole's mother called Nicole, asked her if she could pick up the eyeglasses. Nicole called the Mezzaluna restaurant, and Ron Goldman was there, and he agreed to bring the eyeglasses over to Nicole's condo. Now, Nicole knew Ron Goldman, who was a waiter there. They met in the Brentwood gym. So, Nicole she got restless, and so instead of staying inside her condo to wait for him, she walked outside, she walked down the steps, she opened the front gate, she left the front gate open, she walked down the front pathway, and she was walking back and forth on the sidewalk with her dog by her side waiting for Ron Goldman to bring the glasses to her. At that time, O.J. Simpson was stalking her, and he was able to sneak into the dark garden beside the front steps. Now, when Nicole came, she was tired of waiting for Ron Goldman. She began to walk up the front pathway, and as she was about to close the front gate, she realized that a dog hadn't squeezed through yet. So she called the dog. The dog came through. O.J. was hiding in the dark garden, and what he wanted to do, he had to wait for her to close and lock the front gate. He was going to sneak up behind her, put his hand over her mouth, put the knife to her throat. Then he was going to control the movement of her body. He was going to walk her back up the front steps, walk down the side pathway, and then walk her inside the front door. But the problem was O.J. was too anxious. As he stepped forward, he stepped on a twig and it cracked in half. The dog heard the twig snapping in half, poked its head into the entrance of the dark garden, saw the large black man with the knife lunging toward Nicole's back. The dog began to bark immediately, which in Nicole, when she heard the barking, she knew there was something wrong. She immediately turned around, saw O.J. Simpson coming at her with a knife in his hand, and she froze. Now, one thing I want to say to your listeners, even though I've been in Los Angeles since 1991, I still have my Boston accent. Okay? It's not a speech impediment. It's a Boston accent.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that Irish-Boston mixture accent. Come on now.
Okay.
What do you got? Pembroke, is that German and Irish or Scottish? What is that?
Straight Irish.
All right, top of the afternoon and evening to you, sir. Well, I am Scot-Irish on my mother's side, so I got a little bit of your bloodline in me. So we're brothers. We're brothers by many lineages apart. But you know, it seems like you guys make the best detectives in Boston and New York.
He's the most brilliant detective. I want to call him Sherlock Holmes, but
now, as Cheryl, when she was in the studio last, we're talking about a lot of the relationship aspects of O.J. and Nicole and a lot of historical precedents of that part of the book, and she read some really terrific and interesting passages. But the play-by-play, the minute-by-minute here, the explanation of what you're saying. Now, you studied this not for 5 hours or 5 months. You really kind of sunk into this, didn't you, Detective?
It took me over 10 years to complete it, but now I'll go forward with when Nicole saw O.J. coming out of the dark garden, she froze. Instead of just pushing the front gate open and escaping, she was frozen in fear. And that's when O.J. Simpson punched her. He wanted to punch her in the chin just to knock her out so she'd bounce off the side fence, and then he would just fall over. He'd lean down, she'd fall over his shoulder, and he could carry her up the front steps like a sack of potatoes. But what she did, she ducked her head, and he punched her in a thick skull, and he sprained his wrist. So while Nicole was bounced off the side fence, and she turned around and she was able to grab onto the iron pole, and while O.J. was shaking his wrist back and forth, she managed to hold on to the front of the gate. Now the front of the fence. The side fence was only 3.5 feet wide. It was a couple of inches wider than a closet door. So she was able to hold on the front and the back of it. So while she was holding on, O.J., once the pain in his wrist went away, he grabbed the handle of the gate and he slammed it, trying to lock it. But her fingers are around the front of this iron pole, so the gate just bounced off her fingers and scraped some skin off her fingers. And he grabbed it again and tried to lock it, but she wouldn't take her fingers off the iron pole. But then now O.J. Simpson, being as cunning as a fox, he stabbed her in the back of the head and waited for her to take her hand off the front of the iron pole and grab her bloody head. But she didn't fall for the trap. She leaned forward and was trying to escape, and then he savagely stabbed her in the back of the head. Her head bounced off the iron pole, and she had a scrape on the right side of her head. And then he grabbed her by the hair, tried to pull her head back from the fence, and he was trying to put the knife around the front of her neck to control the movement of her body. But he misjudged the space. The tip of the blade got caught in the iron mesh on the outside of the side fence. And so Nicole, being in a daze, she thought she could grab his hands and grab the knife out of his right hand. So she turned around and grabbed his hand. And O.J. became so enraged, instead of just reaching over and closing the lock on the gate, he became so enraged that she grabbed his hand, his masculinity, his knife hand, that he pulled his hand out of her hands, and he went to stab her in the face. Well, she was able to stick her right hand up in front of her face, and he savagely cut her middle finger, which is a defensive wound. And so while she was bending down, holding the right finger with the left hand, he went for her face again. This time she wasn't able to put her left hand up in front of her face, so she ducked her head, and he stabbed her on top of the head. And he liked the way that the blood exploded from the top of her head, that he went to stab her in the same spot. This time she was able to stick her left hand up on top of her head, and he stabbed her on the back of her left hand. So now she's holding both hands together. That's when he went for the jugular vein. And when she saw the knife coming toward her neck, she ducked her head back against the iron fence, and he nicked the front of her neck. And then he went for a jugular vein again, and she couldn't move her neck back any further, and that's when the knife plunged 2 inches inside the left side of her neck. And when the blood exploded from the left side of her neck, he thought he got the jugular vein, so he went for the same location again. He stabbed her again in the left side of the neck. The blood exploded from her neck. The knife went 2 inches inside her neck. He pulled the knife out. He stabbed her again inside the left side of her neck. The knife went 1.5 inches inside her neck. When he went to stab her 4th time, she finally pushed the front gate wide open, and she escaped.
Now let me interrupt here for a second. Now the details that you've explained and the minute by minute explanation of what's going on here, after your research and the time you've taken to meticulously put this together, you're talking 10 years of research. Why did the LAPD not come up with the same kind of research that you came up with, looking at the crime scene and the evidence? Why couldn't they come to these determinations?
Well, the problem was Robert Shapiro took over the case for O.J. Simpson, and he told Marsha Clark that O.J. was going to plea bargain it. So the detectives who were assigned to the case, they were reassigned to different cases. So basically, they did not conduct a thorough crime scene investigation. So for the 4 months, they were working on different cases. So with me, I was at the crime scene as soon as they took the tape down. And when I walked up the front pathway and I saw all of the dogs, the bloody paw prints from the dogs from the corner up to the front pathway, and then when I looked at all the blood on the front pathway, I said, no, this is not a double homicide. This is 2 separate homicides, because I can see 2 trails of blood on the right side of the front pathway, blood on the left side of the front pathway. And
we're going to talk about the double homicide concept that you're talking about, because that's very compelling and intriguing, because if you have a double homicide or 2 different homicides, that's 2 different ways of looking at a case and deciphering the case and looking at the evidence. But what you're saying is LAPD kind of put it all into one basket.
Exactly.
So when you're out there they take the tape down, because I was there a week after, maybe about a week and a half after, the tape was still up. They wouldn't let me go by or anything because I was working at a radio station, and it was just intriguing to me. I was in law school at the time, and when I walked up and looked at all the blood that was basically still there for the most part, it was still a hot scene. I immediately came to the determination that these people were murdered, and OJ was on the scene. He killed them. Now that hit me really fast. Now the reason why that hit me real fast, because I knew a little bit about OJ's past and the violence and the drugs and the jealousness and all that stuff. I mean, that was common knowledge around the entertainment business in Hollywood at the time about him, and his escapades at USC that were always washed under the carpet and all of that stuff. But the point is, how were you able to deduce all the fine points of the murder of Nicole in terms of the minute-by-minute structure that you put this together in this form? How are you able to be assured enough that this is what has happened from one action to the next action? How does a detective do that?
You follow the evidence and you look at the blood. So when I looked at all the blood on the front pathway, I knew that Nicole had to, well, I knew she escaped from behind the front gate. As she was staggering down the front pathway, her legs buckled, she collapsed, she fell to the ground, and when she landed, her head was 5 feet from the sidewalk, and there was a large stream of blood on the square concrete block. It was 11.5 inches long and 3 inches wide. So I knew that Nicole was lying down on her face. The blood was pouring out of the left side of her head. So I could see Bruno Malley's shoe marks, because he was running through her blood, coming down toward the pool of blood. So I knew that O.J. Simpson was standing by her head. So with him standing by her head, and I knew that he had to look up and down the sidewalk to make sure that no neighbors were walking their dogs. So he had to step closer to the sidewalk, because the left side, it was like a jungle with overgrown bushes. He had to look around the tree to make sure no neighbors were walking down. But the dog was on the sidewalk barking furiously at him, so he lunged for the dog to try to slice his neck wide open. The dog leaped off the sidewalk and ran down the sidewalk. OJ's momentum took him into the wide trunk of the palm tree, so now he's hiding behind the palm tree, and the dog just ran maybe about 20 feet down. And the important thing about the dog was it's an Akita. It's a Japanese dog. They're very protective of its owners. So the dog was trying to stay as close as it could to Nicole. So OJ, the dog was barking so loud, he was afraid that the neighbors in the condo next to Nicole would come out. So he chased.
And Akita is a big dog. It's not a little. That's a huge dog.
Yeah, but this was it was a very young dog.
Right, okay.
But still very aggressive. So O.J., being delusional, he thought he could catch the dog. Now, he's a 45-year-old man with bad legs, so he's chasing the young dog down the sidewalk. The dog ran down to the corner, stopped there, and continued to bark at him. So he had to run to scare the dog further away. He runs down to the corner of Dorothy and Bundy, and he had to hide behind the palm tree to make sure no one was walking up the side street. Well, the dog was barking furiously. The dog didn't run into the rear alley. Well, then O.J. had to chase the dog further down the street. As he's running down the side street, that's when he saw the lights going on across the street. That was Mark Stouffer. He thought Mark Stouffer and his wife were annoyed by the barking of the dog and were coming outside to see what was going on. So O.J. had to run back to the corner of Dorothy and Bundy. The dog ran into the rear alley. Mark Stouffer, he was carrying his son downstairs to his bed, and his son fell asleep in the master bedroom. So he was annoyed. He was turning on all the lights on the first floor, and he was afraid that the dog was going to wake up his son. So when he put his son to bed, closed the door, he walked back upstairs, and he looked out his bedroom window to see where the dog was. And as he was looking out, he couldn't see any cars on the side street. So that's when I knew, when I taped the entire trial, I knew that since the car wasn't parked there at that time, Ron Goldman was not at the crime scene at that time.
Because that's where they found the car afterwards, after Ron Goldman and Nicole both died on the scene. They found his car on the side street.
Right.
And it was interesting when Marcia Clark did her timeline in court that they downplayed the neighbor across the street tremendously. They didn't work that angle at all and just downplayed it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was a decision on their part to do that, or they ever talked to. Yeah, I'm supposing that you spoke or found the records and spoke with these people.
Mark Stouffer, he actually testified, and he testified that when he looked out his window, the vehicle wasn't there. So they should have known right away that it was not a double homicide. But when O.J. was hiding behind the palm tree, Nicole was bleeding, and she tried to get up on her hands and knees, and she fell back down. Now her head was on a square concrete block, which was 6 feet from the sidewalk. And there was another stream of blood, 11 inches long, 3 inches wide. Finally, she was able to get up, and she was sitting down, and she was looking back and forth, obviously trying to, expecting one of her neighbors to walk by with the dog. Well, O.J., he was hiding behind the palm tree, and when he was looking down the street to make sure no cars were coming up the street, he saw the porch light go on, and that was Denise Pilnick's house. She turned on the porch light. She came out into the porch with Judy Linder, and they were standing there. Now O.J. Simpson, he was trapped at the corner because he couldn't, if he ran up the street, they would see a large black man running up the street with a 6-inch knife in his right hand. They would immediately ran back inside the house and called the police. So he couldn't run up the sidewalk. He couldn't run down the side street because he was afraid that Mark Stouffer would look out his window again. So O.J. Simpson, being as cunning...
And that street, by the way, it was well lit.
Yes.
That corner and that street was well lit.
Definitely.
So they would have been able to see that. That's a fact because I've been there.
Yeah. And O.J., being as cunning as a fox, he put the knife away. He ran across the front lawn of the corner house, and he was able to keep the palm tree between himself and Denise Pilnick and Judy Linder. He climbed over the iron railing of the condo next to Nicole. He hurried up the stairs. He hurried through the front patio. He climbed over the little fence, which separated Nicole's front patio from the Taylor patio. He hurried through the patio. He walked down the front steps. Now you can imagine Nicole. She's sitting up on the front pathway, and she's just waiting for a neighbor to walk by. And she thought that O.J. had left. She thought her dog had scared O.J. from the crime scene. So you imagine her. She's sitting there, and O.J. reaching down, grabbing her hair in the back of her head, and pulling her down on the front pathway.
Yeah. Meantime, she was fighting for her life. She was a woman that was in very good physical fitness condition. So she gave a huge fight for her life there from the chaos that you explained, and she's bleeding out there, sitting down at that point.
She was in excellent shape. She was 35 years old. She ran 4 miles every other day. Okay, when he pulled her down on the front pathway, he hurried down by her feet, and he stepped in the pool of blood on the front pathway, and he's looking down at Judy Thielen and Denise Pilnick to see what they were doing. And when Nicole tried to get back up, he stepped back at her, and he stepped on her chest. And that's how we had the bloody shoe print, the size 12 shoe print of the Bruno Malley shoe on her chest. While he's stepping on her chest, she reached up and she grabbed his ankle, and she tried to pull his ankle off, and she grabbed and re-grabbed his ankle 19 separate times because her right finger was still bleeding, and that's how she got 19 drops of blood on his stocking.
Oh, that's right, because she was bleeding. So that's where I was going to ask you, where did you get the number 19?
Yeah, when he took off the socks, and when he got back to his house, he was so mad he threw them on the floor, and he didn't think of the 19 drops of blood. So she was struggling fiercely to get his foot off her chest. He took his foot off her chest, and he stepped back down to her feet, and he was looking for Denise Pilnick and Julie Tielander. And that's when Nicole rolled over, and she got up on her hands and knees, and she tried to crawl toward the front gate. And O.J. Simpson stepped back and stepped on the back of her dress, and that's how he got another shoe print on the back of her dress. But when he walked back down and he saw that Judy Tielander walked off the porch and was walking to her car, and he knew he didn't have enough time to carry her body up the front pathway, as she was kneeling down, he put his hand over her mouth to muffle her scream. He pulled the knife out, and he cut the left side. He plunged the knife into the left side of her neck, cutting the jugular vein and the carotid artery, and then he dropped her body on the center of the front pathway. He ran up the front pathway, leaped into the dark garden to hide, and as Judy Tielander came driving up the street, instead of driving past Nicole's condo, she made a U-turn in the intersection. She drove down the street. When O.J. saw the headlights disappear, he hurried down the front pathway. He looked down the street, and he saw that Denise Pilnick was turning off her porch light and went inside. That's when he put the knife away. He reached down, picked up Nicole's body, carried her up the front pathway, carried her inside the front gate. As he was carrying her up the front steps, feet first, her weight shifted from her feet to her head, and her hair slipped out of his injured left hand, and her head landed on the front pathway. That's on the front step. That's how all of Nicole's blood got all over the bottom of the front on the bottom of the front step.
Yeah, because she was outside the gate, and there was blood outside the gate. How can there be blood in two places at once on both sides of the gate? I always was wondering about that one concept: is if she's fighting on the outside of the gate, then how someone who's getting cut that much, you don't get up and walk through the gate and die on the other side of the gate. This isn't Hollywood. You don't get up.
You're too smart for me. Excellent point. Yes.
Now, all this is taking place. Cheryl, when you got this story from James and all his research, and you were listening to him explain, going through all the evidence that he's compiled, which is in the book, by the way, this moment by moment dissertation of this, and you got to get the book because it really opens up your mind to a whole nother way of understanding. Whether or not you believe what you're hearing today or not, that's not the point. The point is it opens up your mind to a whole another interpretation of what took place in that very moment on, I believe it was July 12th, 1994. Was it?
Correct.
Yeah. So right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Cheryl, when you got this, what was your first impression about all this evidence? I mean,
number one,
what hit you?
Compelling. It was so compelling, I couldn't put it down, and I had nightmares when I first read the rough draft. I think the detective had over 400 pages that he presented me with, and it was so compelling, I couldn't put it down, and it was not something that was on the the first thought in my mind, the O.J. Simpson killings, but it became so compelling because of the history and the history of domestic violence that Nicole endured, and the fact that he had to cover up the killing and make it look like the Colombian drug lords did it in the way that they did their Colombian necktie murders, and the way that he planned it for that night, and the fact that Ron Goldman just happened to show up, and inconvenience him because he had a timeline. He had to get to the airport to catch that plane to get his excuse, his alibi, being in Chicago and playing golf the next day. Ron Goldman showed up, and Ron Goldman was very fit and 25 years old and trained somewhat in martial arts, and he put up a fight, and he had very much defensive wounds, and he died a horrible, slow slaughter of a death. And that's the kind of monster O.J. Simpson is.
Now, when Ron showed up,
is out.
Now, when Ron showed up, Detective, we're in your timeline now. We're right about at the point where Ron shows up. So, can you pick it up from there?
Yes. When O.J. could not carry Nicole's body inside the front inside the front door, he suddenly realized that the dog was barking outside the rear gate. So now he decided to use Nicole's body as bait to trap the dog inside the front gate. So he lifted the body off the steps, and he put a body in front of the front steps. And he still had to cut the right side of her neck wide open, so he lifted her back up onto her knees. He stuck the knife inside the right side of her neck and sliced the right side of her neck wide open. Then he placed her body back on the ground. Now, at this time, he was perspiring so much. He was kneeling down next to her head because he had to open her mouth, cut the bundle of tissue free beneath her tongue, and push her tongue out down through her throat, and then pull it out through the front of her neck. That's what's called a Columbia necktie. It's gruesome. Mm-hmm. So while he was kneeling beside her, the perspiration was flowing into his eyes, and when he tried to wipe the perspiration from his face with his glove, he had like 50 strands of hair in his hand. So he took off his hat, and he placed the hat down on the lily of lyle plant, and then he tried to wipe the perspiration from his head again. Then he made the biggest mistake ever. He took off his left-handed glove, and he put the glove down on top of the hat. And that's how he was able to wipe the beads of perspiration from his eye. But while he was doing this, Ron Goldman finally arrived in the neighborhood. Ron Goldman came down Dorothy Street, stopped at the stop sign, pulled across the street, parked his girlfriend's red Toyota right in front of Mark Stouffer's house. He got out of his car, and he heard the loud barking in the rear alley, and he knew that it was Nicole's dog, so he thought Nicole was in the rear alley with the dog. He walks into the rear alley, and he sees the dog. It's really distressed. He calms the dog down. Well, at this time, O.J.'s leaning over Nicole's head, ready to cut her tongue, when he heard the man's voice, and he looked up, and he thought it was the police. And it wasn't the police. It was Danny Mandel and his girlfriend, his date. They were walking by. And the reason I knew what was going on is when Danny Mandel and Ellen Aronson walked by the front of Nicole's pathway, the front pathway, there was no blood on the front sidewalk. No blood at all. And so now they were on the first date. They were talking about the events of the day. But you know, when you're walking down the street, if you see blood on the sidewalk, you skip around it. You don't step in blood.
No, and once again, that street is well lit.
There was a light right next to the next to the palm tree. So they're walking. They didn't see any blood. They walked to the corner, and they didn't look up the front pathway because the dog wasn't barking, so they didn't hear any noise. So as they were walking to the corner, Ron Goldman was walking out of the rear alley with the dog. He walks down the side street, and then as he's walking up the front pathway, Danny Mandel and Ellen Aronson, they were out down the sidewalk. They turned right on Darlington, and they walked up the street to her apartment. Well, O.J. Simpson, when he saw Danny Mandel and Ellen Aronson walking by, he stood up and he leaped back inside the dark garden, and he was still waiting there. He was hoping and praying that they did not turn around and walk back up the sidewalk. So he was hiding in the garden, the dark garden, and that's when he saw Ron Goldman and the dog walking up the up the sidewalk. And when the dog saw O.J., it began to bark furiously at him. And Ron, instead of looking straight at where the dog was barking, he looked down at the dog, trying to figure out what's irritating the dog now. And O.J. was able to leap further back inside the dark garden. So now when Ron walked up to the front pathway and he saw all the blood on the front pathway, he was shocked, stunned, and horrified. So
yeah, because you don't see that much blood when someone's cut up like that and has a throat cut. All your blood bleeds out right there, and it spreads faster than water.
Yeah.
And it's slippery. It's slippery.
Yeah.
So and the smell is like nothing else. And so that would absolutely shock a 25-year-old guy or anybody who was never in a combat scene or anything like that. Absolutely.
So when Ron Goldman, that was his first time coming upon a bloody crime scene. So he knew it was Nicole's blood. He knew that she was injured, and he wanted to help her. So he hurries up the front pathway. He grabs the gate, and he pulls the gate open, and he had to step back 4 feet because the gate was 4 feet wide. When he stepped back and he looked down and he saw her body, he was stunned, shocked, and horrified. And there she was lying on her left side in a pool of blood. Her dress was messy. The neck was still bleeding out. And he thought he could save her. First, he looked up at the steps, and there was no one there. He looked down the side pathway. There was no one there. He looked into the garden area, but he couldn't see all the way to the rear. So he thought the suspect had already left. And when he looked up the steps, unfortunately, he saw that the front door was open and the light was coming out. And so he thought, I can run up the front steps, run inside, and I have access to a telephone.
Yeah.
Because in 1994, we didn't have all the cell phones. So
nobody had cell phones.
Yeah, he didn't have a cell phone. Yeah. So he's looking at her body, and so he couldn't jump over her body because there was a pool of blood in front of her, then the body, and then there was blood on top of the first steps. So he began to slowly walk around her head. But to walk around her head, he had to step into the entrance of the garden area.
Oh boy!
Once he did that, he was dizzy from looking down at all her blood. He couldn't hear anything because the dog was barking furiously on the sidewalk, trying to warn him that O.J. Simpson's behind him. And before Ron knew it, O.J. grabbed him from behind, put his hand over his mouth, wrapped the knife around the front of his neck. Ron Goldman immediately dropped the envelope, which contained Nicole's mother's eyeglasses, on the right side of Nicole's head, and he dropped the car keys on the front of her head. And that's when O.J. began to drag him back into the garden area to kill him. Well, when Ron began to struggle, O.J. pulled the knife across the front of his neck. There was a 3-inch knife wound. It was a superficial knife wound, but what we call that, it's a controlling wound. He was controlling the movement of Ron's body. And so Ron stopped struggling, and he began to drag him further into the garden area, and Ron began to struggle again, and he pulled the knife across the front of his throat again. It was a 2-inch cut across the front of his neck. And that's when Ron Goldman reached up and pulled O.J. Simpson's hand off the front of his mouth. And while he did that, he stuck his fingernail into the back of his middle finger, and that's how O.J. Simpson got the cut on the back of his middle finger. It was the finest moment for Ron Goldman, because without the DNA and the drops of blood at the crime scene, O.J. Simpson never would have been identified as the killer.
Right, and they struggled because we're running out a little bit of time. They ensued a big struggle, a fight, which you give a minute-by-minute understanding in your book, a minute-by-minute account of the homicides of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And he ends up dying at the scene. But what happens here is an interesting thing, how they were able to isolate some blood drops that were able to connect O.J. there. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we are running a little bit out of time here. So hit that point, because that's something new that the public doesn't know.
Yeah, because if O.J. Simpson did not pull off his left-handed glove to wipe the beads of perspiration from his eye, Ron Goldman would not been able to cut his middle finger because he would not be, because you have a pair of leather gloves. Try to cut the leather glove with your fingernail. It won't cut through. But since O.J. put his glove down on top of his head, his hand was bare. That's how Ron Goldman was able to scratch his middle finger, and that's when O.J. Simpson began to bleed. And it was O.J. Simpson's blood drops at the crime scene that identified O.J. Simpson as the killer. That's how they were able to get the arrest warrant for him.
It's amazing. It's amazing in that struggle that took place. And poor Ron Goldman, who was just coming to deliver some things that were forgotten at a restaurant, and he sees his friend murdered there, and then he fights and dies there, and then O.J. gets back, makes his way back to his house, and we all know what happened with the wall and the bump in the wall and all this stuff, and we all know what happens there. But just real quickly, it was Johnny Cochran who understood a certain ploy he was going to play after they brought it from Santa Monica to L.A. that he didn't disclose to any of his cohorts on the defense team. And I thought that was really compelling, too, because essentially that won the trial.
Yes.
So, look it, we're out of time, and we've got to talk some more here. We're going to bring you on again. O.J. Simpson, the killer, a minute-by-minute account of the homicides of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, author Cheryl Kane and Detective James Pembroke. Hey, you guys were terrific, man. I'll tell you, it is a compelling book, folks. You got to get it. It's everywhere. And I really appreciate you guys coming back for a second time. And will you come back again as O.J. gets himself in more and more trouble? I can't wait for the day to see him behind bars.
Definitely.
Thank you, Jesse. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Let's go get that guy. He needs to be behind in the system for the rest of his life. Otherwise, he's going to hurt somebody else. This is the Jesse T Show. Thanks a lot, guys, for checking in. The Brown Beauty's off duty. The world, according to Torrero, you're straight on the point. O.J., we're coming after you.
Yeah.